Hello everyone, today we talk about women at the Sultanate court of Constantinople. It's a topic I introduce in the broader history of the Turkish wars during the Renaissance, and I think it's important because it's part of one of those intersections. Like if you go look at the list of the Valide Sultan, the Sultan's mothers, you look at their nationality. I mean, it's a famous thing. I mean, they were all from different countries. Very often, they they represented this aspect of the Ottoman Empire that definitely had a practical purpose of using this menage and broader clienteles to co-opt to. We'll see today also the sultanial daughters, how they were married to important figures all over the empire to keep this huge thing together, because actually it was a titanic enterprise considering the size of the empire, but also properly also the heterogeneity of it. And it's also as a topic, it's attached to other aspects of how in the West we saw the thing, right? How especially these countries in Central and Southern Europe that had it next door. I mean, the Ottoman Empire as a universe on its own that contemplated very different dynamics at some level from the West, but also pretty similar ones. And the the curiosity, like the role of women in the Ottoman Empire, was naturally connected also to the darkest aspects of slave trade, of raids. We'll start with that actually, and that it wasn't just about women, but still, as we'll see today, just like I don't know the dev shipment or um, other activities, just as privateering, raiding in other countries, and so on, had different shades in the brutality of it, and could even bring these individuals to the highest levels of the empire. And this is where women actually, this women at least, that were lucky, honestly, very few ones, but came to de facto arrive to rule the empire, right? And sometimes, in fact, we have seen it also in other videos, in order to make a career and impose oneself in the Ottoman world, even for a Western, there were important chances, right? We've seen it with merchants, bankers, military advisors, even the diplomats that naturally remained faithful to native country. However, they basically lived in Constantinople at some point, and naturally they played a bit, in both sides. This is all a history of spies, of course, and of some much more, because through this context also passed enormously meaningful, as you understand, political information, military know-how, and we have, fortunately, I mean, from especially thanks to Western sources, because it's rather in the West that at that point we had this multiplicity of sources and this enormous, just quantitatively speaking, production of documentary sources that also had an important quality. The rising of modern states, there was a bureaucracy, there was a specific criticism, there was humanism. Here we're talking about the Renaissance mostly. Today we cover the 16th and the 17th century as usual. We know a huge deal of this stuff. Like, if I'm no modernist, I know some that do not specifically focus on this stuff, but they told me that it's exterminated, right? It's something huge in terms of just document, and it's all stuff that it's not being completely studied yet. So there is a lot to know, and up to reaching the highest heights, let's say, of the Ottoman power, there was this chance, not even the need to convert to Islam, right? But then you had to be a woman, right? As we will see, this had to do actually with Quranic law, but starting from the, let's say, the raiding aspect, like the Mediterranean is full of legends about beautiful young girls who were raided and later became concubines or wives of Muslim princes, or perhaps of the great lord the Sultan himself, but this was true for many other Muslim powers in the Mediterranean and beyond, and never underestimate in this sense the why this was done. Right, it was not just saying, look, I can't have your women. It wasn't just that, right? It was obviously a part of that, but it was also a way to actually create a connection, right, through certain levels. We'll see better. There's this story, for example, or rather legend here, even once widespread on the Mediterranean coast of the Bella Marsilia, right, a noble woman from the Siennese Grossetan countryside, whom someone wanted to identify it with Roxelane herself. I will speak of her because she's actually the most enigmatic figure in there that also embodies pretty well, at least because of these voices, rumors, because we don't fully know, even in there, the connection with Venice, with other, or more probably actually with other realities. And Roxelane herself, that would have become the mother of Selim II. Right, and these women were very powerful then, right? Those ladies, when chance perhaps aided by their skill and intelligence, raised them to the rank of Valide Sultan, right? The Sultan mother, who was the parent of one of who sat on the throne, that had a power and an immense prestige. Right, as a woman, think of even at the time what this practically meant. Consider here we can give a background. Of course, you know that there were even within the palace, the harem had its own hierarchies within. There was a ferocious competition within the same women, of course. But there is also this pretty sick, let's say. But still logical and actually functional succession system in the Ottoman Empire altogether, where that's exactly where the women could play also so much, because it should be borne in mind that since the time of Mehmed II, the law of fratricide was one of the fundamental in the mechanism of sultanial succession. That is, the brothers of the new sultan were routinely and systematically strangled, and in this regard, it is necessary to take into account the rigid and complex system of control that the sultanial power exercised over Ottoman society through this clientelary system, through this menagerie, if you want, in the great palace of Constantinople. Right? In reality, more than palaces, a set of gardens and pavilions organized in a concentric way. That's also where the gate actually takes. We'll see now takes, but by an external wall practicable by subjects and foreigners up to the quarters reserved for military guards, government officials, and women, in fact. And inside what Westerners called the gate, and starting from the last quarter of the 17th century, the Sublime Gate, as is more famously known today, and which is now commonly known as the Topkapi, that is basically the gate of the cannon, the large and solemn entrance garrisoned by an imposing guardhouse. The heirs to the Ottoman throne were all raised with care, but each separated from the others, right? And that there was no right of succession that privileged the sons of the sultans from those of the concubines yet. Right, and that's where you understand why these ladies were so important in the political institutional game, because to each sultanial succession, the brothers of the new sovereign were placed in various ways not to harm, even in many cases, as we've seen before, through murder. Right, however, there was all a competitive, now it's complicated. Literally, who sat on the throne first was the thing, so that there was also naturally preferential with all the surrounding Timars, especially the one of Thrace was this kind of preference, and that's also why the Ottomans usually concealed the death of the Sultan. Think about Suleiman the Magnificent and all the story. I mean, pretty also dark ones, but it was a practical necessity for an empire that, as Machiavelli remembers, is really one. It has one center. So if that is struck, if the crisis spreads everywhere, right? It's not like a European state that, albeit, yeah, it's starting to be centralized, but it's still a set of lordships fundamentally within the monarchy. Or next, besides monarchy, say better. Here, the centrality of power is fundamental, because every crisis can bring to an enormous political and strategical disaster. However, this cruel succession procedure, replaced starting from the early 17th century though with the practice of perpetual segregation of these men in the imperial harem, right? So it wasn't even that bad if you think about it. Well, it actually was, because at the end of the day, these people were trapped, but at least they were in company. And, however, prevented the succession struggles that have frequently instead blooded Christian Europe. Think about this, because naturally Europeans also, when the Christians, when they wrote about the Ottoman Empire, that they had their own view of it, as of course the Ottomans had their own, but it's way less documented, just for the same nature of the empire. But and it's in fact mostly thanks even to Western sources that we know much of this system. But if you look at the succession system in Christian Europe, right, all these crises of mostly dynastic nature spilled from the course onto the peoples in very ferocious way. Just think about, I don't know, the 17th century. We're talking about this now. We talked about closely recently. We can recall wars like, I don't know, the succession of Hesse-Marburg in 1604, of Clèves and Juliers in 1609, the one of the Duchy of Mantua in 1612, 1627, that of Pomerania in 1637, that of Palatinate 1685, of Spain in 1700, of England in 1713. Well, those were not liked. And similarly in the West, there has naturally been a misunderstanding describing in tones now letters, now voyeuristic, now scandalized, or often all three together, the complicated loves of the Ottoman sultans, their lust, for example, forgetting in this sense, that's a cliche, right? You know, it's the exotic thing, the Eastern, the Oriental, the infidel, it is kind of sinful in lust. That's exactly how the Muslims actually thought of the Christians the other way, forgetting in this sense, or underestimating at least, the Ottoman obsession / necessity for political institutional reasons to need to bring into the world as many male heirs as possible, because that was the game for stabilizing the continuity. Or their will, let's say, in granting and or imposing their favorite brides to because there were multiple ones, the dignitaries of the empire, neglecting that in this way actually a political control was established through sexuality that was not too far with due distinctions. But, you know, think about the complex erotic rites of the court of the Sun King, right, on which even Saint-Simon insists. They weren't excessively different along certain lines, and especially as far as these relationships were concerned. Think about all the favors of kings and so on. And how important even there wasn't about lust in the by default. It was specifically a political game, right? It was a clientelage. So through these women you could control important parts, important families in the kingdom, making favors and so on. So certain men were actually fine with their wives. Actually, and it was a honor and a privilege to have your wife as the lover of the king. Right? If you know that the life of Louis XIV, it's beautiful. There are, you know, it's a great example of that. Well, the stories of Hürrem by Westerners, better known as Roxana in Latin, and the beautiful and intriguing favorite Gözde of Suleiman the Magnificent, who in 1524 had, against all tradition, opted for monogamy, and Wu, about 10 years after, then he had even married, right? And for Hürrem, frowned upon in the menagerie, the Sultan's loyalty towards her aroused indignation, right? Even in the Ottoman milieu. And the beautiful lady was accused of having bewitched him, but also that he feared her a lot. And we don't have to think it was actually not true. As far as the psychological, bond, we can imagine. Of course, these people had feelings like anybody. And she died in 1558. There is the story of Nurbanu, which is the Princess Light, which is also fascinating and undoubtedly authentic in its depth, even though it is rich in fictional details. Right? Think about all the gossip like it existed internationally speaking across Europe about the Ottomans and all the various courts and all the various. This was a way of. It's like the fake news today. Like they're proper political weapons. That is to say, if I'm Venice, I need to spread certain voices. If I am, I don't know, if I'm France, I need to spread certain other voices. There are all different needs. So we often get mostly about these stories, which are, even when fictional, they tell us so much about the world anyway. And the diversity, the heterogeneity of all these news, however, reveals pretty accurately the extreme dynamism that exists, the adventurous details even that could bring these women to power, as we've seen before. So we're actually slaves, right? It became de facto empresses. So think about it. And so Nurbanu, Princess Light, right, which is a nickname that alone says it all about the beauty that her beauty must have been dazzling. And many legends are told about her, in fact, and it seems that she was a Greek kidnapped in Corfu by the Corsair Barbarossa that we talked about, as far as the capture of the video we made on the capture of Tunis and the previous raids of Barbarossa in Italy. And that, in fact, she was presented by him to the imperial harem, where Prince Selim would have become sultan with the name of Selim II from 1566 to 1574, son of Sultan Suleiman, right, would have fallen madly in love with her. And despite the abysmal diversity in terms of nature and intelligence between the two sultans, the son faithfully followed his paternal example in sentimental life, as in the rest of other things, and just as Suleiman had taken Roxelane Hürrem in marriage, making a completely exceptional monogamous choice in the sultanial customs, so did Selim towards Nurbanu, who had a great influence on her husband for the entire period of his reign, but then perpetuated her power as Valide of his son Murad III, Sultan, from 1574 to 1595. And in the Turkish historical tradition, a long period began with her, in fact, which lasted until 1651, the year of the tragic death of another energetic sultan, that is Kösem instead. We talked about her in other videos. That a period is in fact ordinarily defined as the sultanate of women. And almost a century during which the influence, in fact, of women of court, that could be either wives, mothers, even grandmothers of the rulers, was particularly strong. And the rumor that identifies Nurbanu in Cecilia Baffo, the legitimate daughter of Nicolas Venier, relative of one who would later be the winner of Lepanto and governor of Paris, and Violante Baffo, is very widespread but not supported by certain and verifiable evidence. So if she was if she had been actually Cecilia Buffo, she must have been born around 1525. Think about those times. Think about the Battle of Pavia. We're talking about those Charles V, Francis I. It's that world. And her natural father was the lord of the island of Paros, which in 1531 passed following the marriage of a legitimate daughter of Niccolo to the Sagredo family. So Cecilia would have been kidnapped and taken to Constantinople by Khayr ad-Din, who attacked and plundered the island in 1537. She became the favorite of Selim, son of Sultan Suleiman, as we've seen before, and in 1546 she gave birth in her early 20s to the prince who would become Murad III. Savush, that is a messenger, an agent of Prince Selim, landed in Venice under the pretext of an arms trade to inquire about Cecilia's patrician origin. This is how the story goes. And after the death of Suleiman and the enthronement of Selim II, the reports of the Venetian signory with the Sultan became very frequent, with a rich exchange of gifts, even though the clash of the Cyprus War took place at that time. And the Valide Sultan was also in contact with the Queen of France, Caterina de' Medici, who in 1580 asked her to intervene for the renewal of the Franco-Ottoman capitulations. And in her relations, internationally speaking, she was very validly helped by also this other female figure. It was her faithful slave confidant, Kira, the name under which the Jewish Esther actually hides. Consider that, as we've seen, most of these people, they could have remained actually their previous religion, right? And it wasn't even a problem technically as far as the relation with the sultans were concerned. Nur Banu died in December 1583. It's said that she was poisoned by her daughter-in-law, Safiye, the pure. That's what it means, wife of Murad III, who had married her in 1563. And Safiye was Albanian. That's another origin. However, continued her policy of good relations with Venice and had also relations with Elizabeth of England. But other versions authoritatively accredited by the letters of the Venetian Balio in Constantinople claim that she was a Venetian subject from Corfu named Caligartanum, and we will definitely never disentangle ourselves in this forest of chatter and hypothesis, but it is certain that the Valide did not hide her favor and sympathy for the city of St. Mark, and the Serenissima government repaid her equally, which resulted in gifts, correspondence, mutual favors. Is all documented, although the cruel irony of the fate wanted that the war in Cyprus to take place during her reign, and in Lepanto the weapons of the sultanial ships were humiliated by one who perhaps was even a relative of the Valide. Bu, however, after her death in 1583, left actually a tenacious memory in the Venetians, admired and bewildered at the same time by the incredible rise of a girl whom the custom of noble families would have destined as a natural daughter to the monastery or a modest marriage. And Cecilia/Nurbanu's story was undoubtedly a unique case, even if the history of the time is full of characters and events of that type. Moreover, although in fact she converted to Islam, her story doesn't fall properly in the genre of those of the renegades that were plenty of, as we know, from the west to the Ottoman Empire. And because she, originally Christian, daughter of an Orthodox priest of the island of Tinos, who was Kösem, for example, who also skillfully managed the transfer of powers upon the deposition of her husband Hamek I and the subsequent sultanates of her sons Murad IV and Ibrahim I. Eventually, she was murdered in 1571. So we can say, in conclusion, that if several of the Sultan's concubines were originally Christian, and perhaps they might have somehow remained secretly so, because Quranic law forbids a Muslim to marry a Christian, but not vice versa, right? So many dignitaries and ministers of the sultanial court were true and proper renegades, that is, people who had at least formally abjured the Christian faith voluntarily, not as constrained by practices such as that of the Dev Sherme or something similar. So that was also a way to naturally attract all that manpower of skilled, as we've seen. These could be spies, military commanders, diplomats, all at once, right? And that could eventually pass to the other side. And considering the distances, the intersections, the broader contexts, this was a very important political and strategical measure for the empire itself. Alright, so a bit of a shorter video than compared to the usual, but let's say that this can be interesting, I think, as a perspective that is usually right. I mean, these women are objectively famous historiographically speaking, maybe not not accessible in popular culture, but definitely if you study Ottoman history, it's one of the most prominent historiographical topics in within the Ottoman courts and politics and so on. So it's worth the shot, the interest, talking about it, and from that we could also expand on other broader connections. So, however, for now, stop here. I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, do a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming contents. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.